Okay, our last and final lecture for the semester, chapters 15 and 16, the sensory pathways in the somatic nervous system, as well as the autonomic nervous system. So we're going to start off this lecture with sensation. Whenever sensation occurs, a sensory receptor picks up stimuli and sends it to the central nervous system for processing at the sensory processing centers, depending on the sensation itself. Somatic and visceral sensory information is the afferent division of the nervous system, and any motor commands are carried out by the efferent division of the nervous system. So what is the difference between sensation and perception? Sensation is any arriving information. Perception is then the conscious awareness of that sensation. It's the interpretation of the sensation. We also have general senses and special senses. General senses are things like temperature, pain, touch, pressure, vibration, and proprioception. And special senses are things like olfaction, gustation, vision, equilibrium or balance, and hearing. So for special senses, there are special sensory receptors within the respective sensory organs for those senses. And transduction is any conversion of the stimuli into action potentials that can then be sent to the central nervous system. All of the receptors for these sensations are very specific. They pick up only specific sensations and they're not sensitive to other sensations. For example, chemoreceptors are sensitive to chemicals, but they're not receptive to temperature. The simplest receptors are free nerve endings. Receptive fields are areas that are monitored by a single sensory receptor. If this area is large, then it's more difficult to localize the stimulus. It feels more diffuse. Adaptation is the reduction of sensitivity to the presence of a constant stimulus. For example, when you're wearing clothes, your body forgets over time that to pick up that stimulus of the clothes resting on your skin. It adapts so that you don't constantly have that barrage of sensory impulse from that. There are also fast adapting and slow adapting receptors. If you have a fast adapting receptor for a specific sense, then it adapts quickly and you don't recognize that sense over a long period of time. Slow adapting receptors, it takes a longer time for your body to adapt to it. Things like nociception or pain has slow adapting receptors. So you feel that pain for a longer period of time. Your body doesn't immediately adapt to be unaware of it. We also have central and peripheral adaptation. Central adaptation is inhibition of nuclei in the central nervous system that are involved with sensation. And peripheral adaptation is the reduction of the amount of information that reaches the central nervous system. So usually these work together in helping your body to adapt to different stimuli. So let's talk about some of the general sensory receptors. Only about 1% of the stimuli that occurs on our body reaches the cerebral cortex for processing. Only 1%. That's pretty crazy. Exteroreceptors are monitoring your external environment. Proprioceptors are monitoring your body's position in space. Interoceptors are monitoring your internal environment. Nociceptors are monitoring pain. Thermoreceptors are for temperature. Chemoreceptors are for chemicals, things like taste, smell. And mechanoreceptors are for things like pressure. So let's talk first about nociceptors. These are found largely in superficial skin, joint capsules, periostea, that lining that lies over top of bones, and blood vessel walls. Nociceptors are free nerve endings and they have large receptive fields, so oftentimes you feel pain in a diffuse area but not very pinpoint when they are dealing strictly with nociceptors. There's no significant peripheral adaptation, like I said. It takes a long time for your body to get rid of this pain perception. Longer than, say, your body adapting to putting on clothes and the clothes lying on your skin. Pain interpretation can also vary depending on neurotransmitter activity. Certain neurotransmitters can inhibit pain or facilitate it. Nociceptors are also sensitive to temperature extremes, mechanical damage, and dissolved chemicals. The sensation of pain is carried by type A and C fibers in your body. There's fast pain, which is more of a prickling type pain, and slow pain, which is more of a burning or aching. Thermoreceptors are found as free nerve endings in the dermis, skeletal muscles, liver, and hypothalamus. Cold receptors are 3 to 4 times more numerous than warm, so it's easier for your body to pick up being cold than it is being warm. And these quickly adapt to changes. They're very sensitive. It's easy for your body to say, oh, I'm cold, let me start shivering to warm myself up. This is very important for your survival and your vital organs to be able to pick up extremes in temperatures. We have 3 main types of mechanoreceptors. We have tactile receptors, which pick up pressure and light touch. Baroreceptors, which are for internal pressure, and proprioceptors, which is your body's position in space. Some of our tactile receptors, we've got free nerve endings specialized for touch and pressure. Root hair plexuses, which are for movements across the body surface, so you could tell if something's like a bug is crawling on you. Tactile discs are for fine touch and pressure, especially discerning between different shapes and textures. The bulbous corpuscles, also known as Ruffini corpuscles, are specialized for pressure and distortion. Lamellar corpuscles or Pacinian corpuscles are for deep pressure, and tactile corpuscles or Meissner corpuscles are for fine touch and pressure, also low frequency vibration. Tactile receptors can be altered with infection, disease, or damage to sensory neurons, and any loss of sensation with specific boundaries is a sign of trauma to specific spinal nerves. We've talked about that before with dermatomes. Tickle and itch sensations are very closely related to touch and to pain. So sometimes your body even misinterprets pain or touch or even changes in temperature with tickling or itching sensations. Baroreceptors monitor changes in pressure. They respond immediately but adapt rapidly. They monitor organs that change in pressure due to the contents. Proprioceptors, there's no proprioceptors in viscera, which is why you really can't tell where your stomach is in relation to the rest of your organs right now, or your intestines are. We can't tell that because there are no proprioceptors there. These are found mostly in joints, tendons, and muscles, which is why we can tell where our body position is, and it does not adapt to constant stimulation. Some of the major proprioceptors are muscle spindles, Golgi tendon organs, and receptors in joint capsules. Chemoreceptors detect small changes in concentrations of chemicals. They do not send information to the primary somatosensory cortex. Carotid bodies and aortic bodies are some examples of chemoreceptors in our bodies, other than just those that deal with our special senses like gustation and olfaction. Carotid bodies and aortic bodies monitor our pH, CO2, and oxygen in our arterial blood. So let's dive into the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system makes routine adjustments in the physiological symptoms subconsciously. It adjusts internal water, electrolyte, nutrient, and dissolved gas concentrations, and distributes motor commands and visceral reflexes. It's extremely important for your survival so that you can go to sleep and not have to think about these things. You don't have to think to monitor your blood pressure or your heart rate or your respiratory rate. Your body does that for you. That's how you can still be breathing while you're sleeping. So this is different vastly from the somatic nervous system, being that the somatic nervous system is voluntary and autonomic is involuntary. Think automatic. The integrative centers of the autonomic nervous system are located in the hypothalamus. Their visceral motor neurons are called preganglionic neurons, and they're responsible for our visceral reflex arts. They synapse on postganglionic neurons, and they innervate visceral effectors, such as smooth muscles, glands, cardiac muscles, adipocytes, all things that require automatic responses. The autonomic nervous system can then be split into the sympathetic division and the parasympathetic division. The sympathetic division is responsible for our fight or flight responses. Parasympathetic is responsible for rest and digest. So they are extreme opposites of each other. So when the sympathetic nervous system is turned on, you will have heightened mental awareness or alertness, increased metabolic rate, decreased digestive and urinary functions, activation of energy reserves, increased respiratory rate and dilation of respiratory passageways, increased heart rate and blood pressure, and activation of sweat glands. So the person might experience being on edge, feeling of energy and euphoria, your heart is pounding, feeling tense and beginning to shiver, breakdown of glycogen for increased energy. So this might not just be if you're in a case of extreme trauma or if you are in a situation where you're running from, a lion. It could be something of a long period of stress. This can contribute a lot to a person's anxiety if they have long-term sympathetic activation. The parasympathetic nervous system causes a decreased metabolic rate, a decreased heart rate and blood pressure, increased salivary and digestive secretion, increased motility and blood flow in the digestive system, and stimulation of urination and defecation. So somebody with parasympathetic activation would experience pupil constriction, digestion, changes in blood flow and glands associated with sexual arousal, stimulation and coordination of defecation, contraction of the bladder during urination, and a reduction in heart rate and force of contraction. That's key. So not only is your heart rate decreased, but it's not working as hard. And if somebody is in a long-term state of sympathetic activation, that can be a really high risk factor for having a heart attack. And that's why people who are chronically stressed tend to have higher incidences of heart attacks. Now, many of our glands and organs and body parts are dually innervated by both sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. So they'll receive instructions from both depending on what's activated in the body and what your body needs. So your body has this resting autonomic tone. The autonomic neurons show a resting level of spontaneous activity, especially where dual innervation occurs, and that's because the body has to be able to switch between its sympathetic and parasympathetic states with ease. There has to be some kind of spectrum. It can't be all or nothing on the sympathetic or parasympathetic side, or it would take way too long to switch between states. We also have to talk about some of our higher order functions that we're responsible for in our brains. The cerebral cortex is required for the performance of any higher order function. It involves conscious and unconscious information processing, and these are subject to adjustment over time. They're not innate. These are learned behaviors. So memory is one of our higher order functions. Memory is stored bits of information gathered through experience. Fact memories are as they sound. Your ability to remember facts, things that you're learning in school. Skill memories are like riding a bike. You remember how to do those things over time. Usually these are stored near the motor cortex. Short and long-term memories. Short-term memories are, as they sound, short-term. They can be committed to long-term memories with memory consolidation if they are constantly repeated and if you are experiencing something that can lead to a long-term memory. Long-term memories can also be secondary or tertiary. Secondary long-term memories fade with time and they take a lot of effort to recall, so you'd have to repeat those in your mind. Tertiary memories are going to be with you for a lifetime. Those are things like your name or the contours of your body. Like they say, you know me like I know you like the back of my hand. That's because you know what your hand looks like, the contours of it. You'll never forget that unless you have some kind of dementia. There are a lot of different brain regions that are responsible for storing your memories. The amygdala is responsible for storing some of your memories associated with emotion, because the amygdala is associated with fear and anxiety. So it might store some of your memories associated with those emotions. The hippocampus has a lot of the long-term, short-term memories. Nucleus basalis is kind of up in the air as what its function is in relation to memories. But it's been shown that damage to the nucleus basalis can lead to a change with emotional states, memory, and intellectual function, so we know that it serves some sort of purpose with memories. Most of our long-term memories are stored in the cerebral cortex, and information on one subject might be separated into different brain areas, like how to spell a word versus your information that you know on said word. The example your book gives you is how to spell the word cow, might be in one area, whereas information on cows, all the factual information you know about them, might be in another area. What those cows look like might be in a separate area, and what they sound like might be in a separate area. So information on one subject is kind of all over the place. Memory storage might be influenced by increased neurotransmitter release, facilitation at synapses, or formation of additional synaptic connections. Anytime you are able to form a new synapse with a memory, you've learned something new, So if the connection for that factual piece of information is lost, then the memory is lost. A memory engram is a single circuit that corresponds to a single memory, and these are formed with experience and repetition. Consciousness is your awareness of and attention to external events, and different states of consciousness indicate different levels of ongoing central nervous system activity. Sleep, so you've got deep sleep, aka slow wave or non-REM sleep or NREM sleep, and you've got REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep, which is not deep sleep. These will alternate throughout the night. You'll be in states of REM sleep, you'll be in states of NREM sleep. And if you don't have this cyclic changes between REM and NREM, you might have a sleeping disorder, which 1 in 4 people do in the US. Arousal is your awakening from sleep. So stimulation of the reticular activating system, or RAS, stimulates the cerebral cortex, which would cause arousal. So the RAS becomes less reactive to stimuli after long periods of time. Then different neurotransmitters might have different effects on brain chemistry. Serotonin is our happy hormone. So too low levels of serotonin might cause things like depression, anxiety. Norepinephrine is going to cause alertness. Dopamine is our reward center. If we have too much of this might lead to things like addiction. If we don't have enough of it could lead to things like Parkinson's disease. With age, our brain will reduce in size and weight. Our neurons will reduce in number. We'll have less blood flow. Changes in synaptic organization, therefore memory changes. Intracellular and extracellular changes in the CNS neurons, like plaques and tangles forming, that could cause things like senile dementia, which would result in things like memory changes and changes of an ability to do activities of daily living. The most common and serious form of senile dementia is Alzheimer's disease.